All right, if I can just get an affirmative that my screen is up there, we'll be good to go.
I see it.
Excellent. Well, good morning, everyone. Thanks for stopping by our virtual booth or table, as it would be. We're going to talk real quick about DOCSIS 3.1, specifically OFDM subcarrier analysis and impairments. Want to do a quick overview of the subcarriers, and then we'll get into some troubleshooting and some interesting things we found over the last few years. A little bit about myself. I don't want to dwell too long on this, but I wanted to just show you my email address and my contact info should we run out of time and there are questions yet to be answered. Pete@VeExInc.com, very, very simple. Basically, been in this business a long time and enjoy doing things such as this, especially with the subject matter. What we're going to cover, like I said, is we're going to talk about working with subcarriers and then some real world samples. Those are really the more interesting pieces to the audience when it's technicians and folks like that. OFDM, orthogonal frequency division multiplexing, transmission technique that consists of combining or multiplexing many, many subcarriers with precise spacing. For DOCSIS 3.1, these subcarriers are QAM modulated. We'll talk about that in a second. Example, in a 192 megahertz wide OFDM channel with 50 kilohertz spacing, you have 3,840 subcarriers, lots of carriers. Squeeze that spacing to 25 kilohertz and we end up with 7,680 subcarriers. Really a lot of subcarriers to get a handle on, and this slide kind of shows, our legacy single channel QAMs up at the top, and then how many subcarriers can exist inside an OFDM channel here. So you can see a big difference there as far as the numbers, the sheer numbers there. So the OFDM channel, mentioned before, 25 kilohertz subcarrier spacing, 7,600 around there, and then 50 kilohertz, about 3,800 and change, depending on certain things. In the middle or any point inside the OFDM carrier, you can lock certain areas of the frequency to lower, more robust QAM modulations. For instance, if there's an area where the OFDM exists that's notoriously bad, some of your big cities have issues in certain areas, you can lock that subcarrier range to a lower modulation. So instead of being out completely, if it was, let's say, a QAM 1024, a 4096, you can lock it into a 256, as we've all been running 256 QAM for many, many years, and that portion of the spectrum can still carry information. So that's one of the added benefits here. As far as test instruments go, VeEx is a test instrument manufacturer. We have several varieties for testing DOCSIS 3.1 and OFDM specifically. Up at the top is a little guy called the CX310. Basically, that's an INR instrument that the techs carry to the customer premise to do channel measurements, modem testing, OFDM analysis, speed testing, and things like that. The middle one is a 380, 350. We call it a V300 series, and you can use that in the plant, the head end, and also for business services. There's two versions. There's a 380 and a 350. So the bottom one is the big guy. He would really be a head end unit. Again, looking at subcarrier analysis and OFDM tools. All three have the same exact cable modem. So no matter what instrument you use, you get the same exact information. Very, very cool to have a big unit, big head end, fancy unit, having the same functionality as a very basic unit. One of the functions the technicians like is it's very, very easy to use, and we'll see that in the coming screens. That AT2500 down the bottom, we call it a 3G. It goes up to 3 gigahertz in the spectrum analysis mode. It really is the next generation of the Sunrise AT that exists in many, many head ends across the world today. VeEx had purchased what was left of Sunrise about 4 years ago, and we migrated that Sunrise product into this new version that has a full two-way cable modem as well as the OFDM analysis capabilities. Here we have a picture of a graphs tab. Now, really just have a highlight around the OFDM, in this case, channel 25. This particular MSO has 25x4 bonding, meaning they have 25 channels down, 24 single quams with an OFDM channel at the end there, and then 4 channels up. We're going to stick with the downstream measurements at this point, and we're really going to focus on the subcarriers. Down the bottom of this screen, there's a little table that indicates profiles. Profiles A, B, and C in this case show in green, meaning they are locked and ready to use as they have modulations next to them. So profile A is a QAM 256, profile B is a QAM 1024, and C is a 4096. So we're going to talk about those subcarriers because those are the guys that are going to do the heavy lifting as far as data transmission goes. So making measurements on the subcarriers. Here's a spectrum analyzer. If I'm in the head end and I want to look at the OFDM carrier, yeah, I can see it's there, and it shows us almost nothing except that it is there and it's fairly flat. And we can see our pilot carrier is peaking up above the rest of that channel there, but it doesn't really give us a whole lot. So when we get into OFDM and troubleshooting, we need to dig deeper. We need to look inside of that carrier. So again, this is just a bigger zoom of carriers. What this screen provides is some basic information. Levels, min, max, and average of all the carriers that exist in that OFDM, whether it's 7,000, 3,000, whatever it is. And then the MERs of all those QAM channels. Since they're QAMs, we can derive MERs from those to start to look at signal quality and robustness of that OFDM carrier. So what we do, we have a subcarrier scan tool. That is where we're going to dig into the OFDM and we can look at power level, MER, and then noise. So 3 very important components to troubleshooting an OFDM carrier. The first one, when we go into subcarrier scan, we display the power. The bottom screen, the bottom half is the entire OFDM channel, and it's divided up into 6 megahertz sections. 6 megahertz just happens to be our usual comfort zone because we've been dealing with 6 megahertz channels for many, many years. The top of the screen is a zoom of where the marker is placed on the bottom. So where that marker is placed on the bottom, we have a color breakdown there. I just wanted to kind of go over that real quick. The pink section is where the PLC resides. The PLC is the physical or PHY link channel that drives the OFDM. That's the controlling mechanism between the CMTS and the cable modem. The green pilots are sticking up there. Those are continuous throughout the OFDM in all sorts of different places. The rest of the carriers in blue are the data quants. And those are the profiles that can be a 256 in this case, a 1024, or a 4096. Power has a scale over to the left. This is 1 dB per division, so it looks actually a little worse than it really is. Not a whole bunch of deviation there, but you can see how flat the power is across the entire OFDM carrier. Where it starts to get interesting is MER. The bottom, just like before, the bottom screen, the bottom view is the entire OFDM carrier. There's a scale over to the left, and it looks like, you know, we're well above 46 for pretty much the entire OFDM carrier. This would be a very high-performing modem if this was in a customer premise. The top, again, is a zoom of where the bottom marker is placed, and again, they have it placed where the PLC is. So there's about 120 carriers inside that 6 megahertz spot where the marker is. So this is what you want to see. You want to see nice, flat, uninterrupted graph. And again, I really just have to glance at the scale. I'm checking all 1,800 carriers in this case very, very quickly. The subcarrier scan generates in about 30 seconds. We have a noise floor measurement, so we're looking underneath the OFDM carrier for noise. Again, a scale over to the left. The bottom is the entire OFDM carrier. There's a small carrier sticking up to the left, a little bit of noise, high noise there. No customer in a million years is ever going to notice that. But in the VeEx tool, a very, very fine-tooth comb, if you will, for looking into and under the OFDM carrier. You want to stay below about 5 to the left. And this one is nice and flat. So again, this would be a very, very high-performing carrier. The fourth view we have is a combined or correlated noise and MER graph. And you'll see that this one is pretty clean. but I'm going to show you some ones that really stick out and see how easy it is to see where you have problems. This particular one, this MER view, has some impairments in it. There's two spots that the MER is degraded. So where we have that marker there, we're in the mid-30s, which isn't terrible. The OFDM will run, but you may have some performance degradations as a result of this. So very quickly I can look at this. I said, wow, I got two issues in this particular carrier. Here's the inverse of that, which is a couple spots of high noise. Generally, noise will be the cause of low MER, but not 100% of the time. And we'll see a sample of that in a minute as well. Correlation again, low MER by high noise, and this is one is a reflection of the other. But again, don't assume that is always the case. There's a tool called OFDM check. Until now, we've been talking about full cable modem, bonding, upstream transmit, etc., things like that. When the OFDM becomes so unhealthy that the modems drop, let's say they drop the 3.1 and go back and become 3.0 modems. How do you check that? We have a function called OFDM check, which is a forward-only measurement that locks onto the OFDM. You don't have any bonding with the single channel qualms. There's no transmit. It's just forward OFDM. Very handy for the head end, or if you're checking just outputs of a CMTS, doing an installation or something. But when the OFDM in the plant becomes very unhealthy, you can use the OFDM check to lock on and dig into that. You can lock on to some pretty poor OFDMs and get the same subcarrier statistics. Chances are, if the OFDM is dropping out, coming back, and so on, your PLC may be hit with ingress or something like that that's causing it to go down and lose communication. So this is a very important function to do when there's problems in the field. Service level testing, again, the OFDM gives you access to everything that the full modem does, but it's just going to be forward. The use cases, again, like I said earlier, this is the most interesting part for technicians because you see some real world stuff. We have piles and piles of instances where we work with customers that we're trying to troubleshoot their plant, their head ends, and figuring out why the OFDM is not working. So here's a basic one that this customer's modem was going on and off, and the MSO had gone out and said, hey, there's really nothing wrong, but we had then did a ride along and we went to the tap and we saw this. So immediately we said, okay, we have an issue with noise in the plant because we could see high noise and low MER in a couple of spots. Trace it back to where the problem goes away, divide and conquer just like we always do, and found a cracked piece of cable that was letting ingress in, and that was causing this particular modem to go on and offline. So very quickly you can jump in and see that we have noise causing poor MER in this case. Here's another one that was getting, modems were rolling back, and this particular ingress and noise was causing the PLC to die. So if your PLC is in a spot in the OFDM that is susceptible, that needs to be moved so the modems can be reliable and don't drop in and out on occasion. This is an interesting one. This was one of the early ones. This was at an actual vendor day in Indiana. Everybody was rolling out their 3.1 test equipment, 3.1 tools, and nobody could lock at 3.1 in the vendor room, including us. This is where we use the OFDM check to kind of see what the OFDM looked like, and we can see here it's not flat, it's very wavy, and there's a big piece of noise sticking up at the other end. Turns out there was some LTE ingress. You guys have probably all been to the vendor days where you have 50 people walking around with LTE phones, and the phones act like modems. When there's a lot of noise, they jack up their transmit. Well, this was getting into the system in the room through a bad connector, and it was kicking everybody's OFDM back. So this was a very interesting one and a very timely one because we could demo the functionality of the equipment. I mentioned before that generally noise is a cause of low MER. Bad equipment can be as well. This is a guy doing a CMTS turn-up, and he looked at the subcarriers and he sees this big hump. Noise was flat. He was going to send me a noise floor picture, but he has yet to do that. But turned out it was a bad CMTS card, a Cisco line card, and replaced it, and the MER flattened out. I had another occasion where a gentleman was going to send me a picture. I had a customer who has his OFDM at about 870 to about 930 something, and he was getting low throughput doing a speed test. He was getting about 200 meg down. And what ended up happening was we had him lock in 3.0 mode, and he was getting about 600 megs. So wait a minute. So we took the 3.1 apart, took everything apart, started tracing it back. We found out that the house amp that was running this installation was only rated for 860 megahertz. We barreled it up to bypass it, flattened everything out, and got 1.2 gig down. So that was a very interesting one, and it looked very wavy, as according to what he said, kind of like the screens on the right. So that was another non-noise induced impairment. This one is probably the most severe that we've seen. Up to the left, you can see the MER is chewed out in a large portion of the OFDM. If you look further down that page, the middle screen, there's some qualms, or actually there's noise that actually represent qualms. So what this customer had done was injected filler qualms into the space where the OFDM was going to go. This was pre-rollout. So they were having problems in the field locking modems at 3.1, but the head-end test point, which was before the combiners, everything worked fine. This went on for a period of about 6 weeks before we were called in to kind of take a look. And a couple sales guys using a small meter in about 10 minutes found the problem. Now that was a very interesting one as far as that, but that noise diagram there. We do training. We do a lot of deep dive OFDM seminars, and they last about a couple hours. And this is always the most interesting one and gets a lot of comments from the audience. I mentioned fine-tooth comb before. This nice looking MER on the bottom has a little tiny spot where somebody forgot to turn off a leakage carrier. So that little spot got picked up. And again, no customer in a million years out in the field using a modem is going to see this. They're not going to have degraded throughput performance significant enough to call for trouble, but the meters themselves will all pick this kind of stuff up. Here's another sample of a little roll-off at the end. Again, very minor when you look at the overall OFDM, but with this was a little bit of LTE getting into the system, and the top left picture indicates the spectrum analyzer on the system picking up some noise, and then the bottom two screens is a measurement in the spectrum analyzer called persistence that will look for intermittent ingress underneath the OFDM carrier. Again, probably not enough to affect customer performance, but the tools that we have are very, very capable of finding even the smallest issue inside an OFDM. The test equipment we talked about before. I'm going to close it out now. I think we're getting close. I set a little reminder on my phone. So I'm going to escape out and drop the share, which looks like I did. Guys on the controls, I'll hand it back to you. We're probably at about 28 or 29 right now, it looks like. I thank everyone for attending. Again, I'll throw my contact info up there in case anybody has follow-up questions. I'd be more than happy to address those questions, discuss OFDM in greater detail, deeper dive. If you're interested in getting us to show you some of these tools to help you with any OFDM issues you might have, we're more than happy to do that. Truthfully, OFDM has been pretty reliable so far. It's not been without its issues, and when folks do have issues, they can be very difficult to locate. And these tools are very, very helpful in speeding up that location process and make a determination of where the problem exists in the frequency band and how severe it is. So with that, everyone, I'd like to say thanks again. If you want to give me a call, give me an email, I'll certainly be able to help you with further details on the OFTM capabilities. Thank you.